Good morning. I'm Richard Callahan, Creekside Realty. We're here to discuss the Silicon Valley real estate market, week number 32. The slides that going on in front of you are the slides that we'll be discussing in the roughly next 35 minutes. Basically, this is my own accumulation of data, my own processing of the data. What I try to do is take into consideration this cyclic nature of real estate. For example, most of the activity is generated as a result of weekend open houses, but most of the activity is reported during the week. So I use a whole number of weeks for most of my data. The one exception that I'm considering reevaluating is the inventory. I currently just use the instant inventory, but that changes as much as 25% during the week. So taking a 7-day median makes a lot more sense. But let's get into the data. This is the first slide we're looking at. And what we're looking at is the number of active listings compared to the 10-year median for the same geographical area. And basically, you can see from the percentages here, there's a shortage in most of Santa Clara County, as much as only 25% of the listings you'd expect in the Milpitas, North Valley, Berryessa, Santa Teresa, Blossom Valley area. But then if you go over into the expensive areas of San Mateo County, you actually have 5% more in the Foster City area, which is right here, just a fairly small market area, is actually 122%. Lack of inventory favors the seller. A surplus of inventory favors a buyer, so that's why Foster City's blue, and most of the other areas are either red in color or white in color. Now, flipping it over and looking at the number of offers, we have the reverse problem. We have a huge deficit of the number of offers. You can see the offers in Santa Clara County are running right around 60-65%, maybe on an average. You go into San Mateo County, the number looks roughly the same, but on the coast, there's only 1/3 the number of transactions that there should be, 36%. Unfortunately, for the first 3 slides, I don't have the data for the micro markets in Alameda County. And now the more important thing is the ratio between the two, days of unsold inventory compared to the 10-year median. And here you really start seeing the picture. Santa Clara County is basically red, favoring the seller, hot marketplace, basically, indicating that the DUI is lower now than it normally is. And you can see that you're basically 50 to 80%, depending on which micro market area in Santa Clara County you're on. But now if you go into San Mateo County, the reverse is true. The DUI is higher than normal, anywhere from 25% above normal to basically 70%, except for Foster City, which right now is 235% of normal. So more than twice as long DUI, which means market's twice as slow, half as slow. It's taking double the time to sell the properties on the marketplace. So that gives you a nutshell. Now what we're doing is looking at days unsold inventory. This is just the raw count. And now we do have the data for the micro markets in Alameda County. And you can basically see the outlying areas of the areas that are moving quickest. The low DUI means the market's turning over more rapidly. It's taking less time to sell. You can see the slowest areas, the expensive areas in San Mateo County, and the coast is the second slowest at almost 82 days. I consider 40 to 80 roughly a balanced marketplace. Now, for those that are having a hard time understanding the concept of the previous slides, this is simply looking at how long is it taking the long typical seller to sell their property. It's essentially the 75th percentile seller. How long is it taking? So the seller that's able to sell, but it's 25% of the sellers take longer, but 3/4 of the sellers are able to sell quicker. You can see in Santa Clara County, for the most part, you're at about 2 weeks. South County is at 30 days. Saratoga, Los Gatos is at 40 days. Los Altos, Palo Alto is at 3 weeks. You go up into San Mateo County, 93 days for the expensive areas. Most of the areas, the larger areas, are at 3 weeks. Foster City, being small, is 42. And then if you go over into Alameda County, they're right at 2 weeks. So Alameda County is probably the fastest, followed very closely by Santa Clara County, and San Mateo County is taking the longest time to sell. And again, this, in my opinion, appears to all be COVID-driven. People do not believe they're going to have to commute into work 5 days a week in the middle of rush hour traffic. They're thinking they can get in fewer times or have more flex hours and therefore avoid some of the worst of the commute hours and are willing to drive further. Now we're looking at the ask price adjustments. And this is the sellers they were selling their home, accepting an offer, how much did they adjust their price between the time they went on the marketplace and they accepted that offer? And you can see almost all the numbers are negative. There are times when the number have gone up. I think I saw 101.4%. I know I've seen 100.4%. So sometimes sellers actually raise their price on average. That's not the market we're in right now. You can see the decrease, but this is a very tight metric. I'm going from 99.75% to 101% is the whole range of a seller's marketplace, and 98 to 99.25% is the whole range of a buyer's marketplace. And the balanced marketplace is only a 0.5% range from 99.25% to 99.75%. The reason for this is sellers do a whole lot of research before they put the house on the marketplace, and they're selling quickly right now, so they don't even have time to do a price reduction. The percentage of the market share that is taking price reductions is small, so almost all the properties are selling at the same list price at the time the offer is accepted as when they went on the marketplace. But the huge advantage of this number is we don't have to wait for escrows to close, because you're looking at what's happening to the asking price when the offer is accepted. And as these numbers go more negative, you know the market's slowing down. As these numbers go more positive, you know the market's heating up without waiting for the 5 weeks or 6 weeks for escrows to close. This is the frequency of reductions of ask price. So you can see in Santa Clara County, right, only about 10% of the sellers are reducing their price at all. So that is why the percentage, the magnitude is so tight. But then if you go and look into San Mateo County and you look at the expensive areas, almost half the sellers, 44% of the sellers, are reducing their asking price. That would suggest that the sellers and listing agents, when they're listing the properties, are listing them too high for the market conditions in that geographical area. The San Mateo County coast, I think, is next to 22%. And then you drop down basically to 20%, and most of the areas are down around 15% or less. You can see Alameda County is down around 10%, some, single digit, 9%, 8%, 6%, but you also have some at 13%. So this gives you an idea of how widespread sellers' price reductions are. Now we're flipping over and we're looking at the overbid. This is what the buyers are willing to pay extra to try to ensure that they get the property that they fell in love with when there's perceived other interest in the property. If there is no perceived other interest in the property, the buyer's going to just go in at the asking price. The magnitude of overbidding, as this number goes up, the market heats up. You can see most of Santa Clara County is pink in color with just about 7% overbidding. You can see that San Mateo County has 2 areas that are negative. So this means on average, the buyers are going in and offering almost 2% below the seller's asking price. And these are in the 2 areas where the sellers are taking the biggest price reductions. You can see in Redwood City, it's sort of a balanced marketplace with about 3% of it being the overbid. And it's sort of amazing that 3% is sort of almost a balanced marketplace. You can see that I consider anything from 99 to 101.5% to be balanced. Yes, Redwood City does have a small shade of pink to it, and so does Saratoga at 1.6%. But then if you go over into Alameda County, it's pretty robust. Not quite as robust, I don't think, as Santa Clara County, but clearly fairly close at 6 and 7%. But some of the highest overbids are actually in Berkeley, Alameda, and Oakland, which has sort of caught me by surprise. I would have thought those would have been closer to job centers and would have been suffering sort of like the San Mateo County area. Now we're looking at the frequency of overbidding, how common is overbidding, and you can see the big standout is on the coast. Only 1 in 10 sellers are getting more than their asking price. The expensive areas, 1 in 3 sellers are getting more than their asking price. But if you come down into Santa Clara County, you're basically 2/3 to 3/4 of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. And in Cupertino, it's almost 90% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. In Alameda County, it's also very widespread with about 3/4 to 80% of the sellers getting more than their asking price. This is the appreciation over the last 9 months of 2015. Last week, we talked about the expensive areas because it was bright red. I've looked into that potential error And what I found was the expensive areas in San Mateo County have the most fluctuating median sold price, and that's because it's low volume and the dollar prices are so high. But I still want to do some more investigation because I didn't see anything that would have caused last week to be something like 98% appreciation and this week 45. If I was to guess, the 45 is more accurate, but I want to understand why there was a fluctuation in the data for 1 week when it's using macros and the formulas are all the same. But I'm not seeing any red flag, but it does make sense that the expensive areas, small market shares, are going to have the most fluctuation. And I looked into that, and that did fit the expensive areas in San Mateo County. But now if you come out into the Alameda area, county area, you can see that's where we've had the most appreciation. And again, that's because, in my opinion, with the pandemic, people are willing to commute a further distance, making more demand on those areas. And those areas are seeing basically 85 to 90% appreciation. Santa Clara County, the more affordable areas, are seeing around 82% appreciation. The other areas are, more like 60 to 70%. Basically here, the red is higher than the typical appreciation. The blue is below the typical appreciation. So you can see the expensive areas in the coast in San Mateo County have had some of the least appreciation, as well as the expensive areas in Santa Clara County. Los Altos, Palo Alto, only 35%. In fact, that may be the lowest appreciation, 33 in the Bay Cities, which is actually a little surprising because they were doing so well before the pandemic. But that's how dramatic the pandemic has impacted real estate. Here is the actual sold price, and instead of just following the median price, which is the middle, which is what most people follow, I add in the 10 percentile, the number on the left. That's the cheapest 10% in a geographical area, as well as the most expensive 10% or the 90 percentile on the number on the right. For example, if we pick Campbell, Santa Clara, Willow Glen, Cambrian, you can see that 80% of the homes are between 1.350 and $2.5 million, with the median being 1.750. 40% of the homes are basically in the $400,000 price range from 1.350 to 1.750. And then the next 40% of the homes are between 1.750 and 2.5. You can see that when you go above the median, the spread of price is much greater, as one would expect in plotting home prices. Here is a summary of the data that we just went over, so you can come in and look at your micro market area and find out the conditions. You can come out and find your price range and then figure out what area you can afford. Or over on the right-hand column, and I don't have a heat map of it, is the rough estimate of the payments. And I can't stress enough that that's a very rough estimate for a lot of reasons. Now what we're looking at is the three major components of all Silicon Valley. So up to this point, we've been looking at the micro market areas. Now we're looking at all those micro market areas put into a blender, and we're looking at inventory as a percent of normal. So the purple line down here is your inventory, and we only have 59%, call it 60% of the inventory you'd expect. But we're only selling 70% of the homes that you would expect. But because the number of homes being sold is a larger percent than the inventory, that gives us a faster DUI at basically 81%, or call it 80%. The market right now is actually faster than it typically is, even though there's not a lot of volume behind it. This is just a table of raw numbers. I don't expect you to look at it all, but to me, the big takeaway is right now we're only selling 1,893 homes. Our record low in the last 25 years was in 2007, and that was 2,120 homes. We're now only selling 90% of our previous record low for the last 25 years, and we're only selling 67%, so 2/3 of our record low in the last 10 years. Again, that's sort of really stressing the record low volume. You can see that 2023 has been basically record low, except for a short period of time right shortly after the pandemic was announced and we weren't allowed to show homes. 2020 was the record low number of transactions, offers accepted. Here's those estimates over time. So this is for all of Silicon Valley. So the cheapest single family home gives you a payment of about $7,000. The typical price for Silicon Valley gives you a home mortgage payment of just about $12,400, and the most expensive is $24,000. And that again is assuming an 80% loan. It's assuming at the average interest rates. A lot of people that are buying houses can get a lower interest rate by one, shopping around, two, by taking 401ks and moving it over to whatever bank is giving them the loan, whatever lender is, because a lot of times they have relationship pricing, which can save you up to 0.75% at a lot of the major lenders. Now we're looking at something pretty unique for me. I don't know anyone else is doing it. And what we're doing is we're looking at the distribution initially each month, separated by a month from 12 months ago to 3 months ago, and then every week. And basically what you're doing is you're comparing the ask price at the time the offer is accepted to the original list price. So how much the seller is doing the price reduction. And the dotted lines start off a year ago or monthly. When you get to the dashed lines, that's when we go to 12 weeks. So there, and that, you can see we're jumping around a little bit. This is a little bit more unstable. You can see we're going racing up. Here we're at 11 weeks ago. That was about the peak of the marketplace. And now we've been coming back down a little bit. And you can see that there's a little bounce where a couple weeks ago was lower than it is now. But clearly we're off of the peak up here, which I think I said was about 11 weeks ago. Now we're flipping over and looking at the overbid. So this is what are the buyers doing. This is a more stable index, but the concept is the same. So you can see that we went down, there's down some more. Now we're about up in the spring. Now we're basically right at the peak. And I think if you look at the very last couple weeks, we may see a downward trend. I think that maybe the last 2, maybe 3 weeks, sort of like they're down slightly from the peak. We're still very strong. We're still almost as strong as we were earlier this year on overbidding. But remember, this is a 5-week lag time, so it takes an extra 5 weeks to get this information. It doesn't surprise me that the list price reduction started coming down earlier than the overbidding, which is the one or the reasons I started looking at list price reductions. Now we're looking at Silicon Valley active inventory, all the micro market areas in the 3 counties in a blender. And what we have are 3 lines that are going to be pretty consistent. The red line is the hot marketplace. In a hot marketplace, you have low inventory. So the lowest inventory you'd expect is 1,934. The median inventory you'd expect is 3,000. The highest inventory you'd expect is 3,500. We're right now at just under 1,800 listings on the marketplace, below what you'd expect. And the reason these curves are here is that's to show you there's a huge cycle in real estate. Instead of just comparing, you got more inventory here, you really need to be comparing it to the median, the 10 percentile, and the 90 percentile to see where you're going. For example, here in 2019, you can see that we had a surplus of inventory. Then the very next year in 2020, 2021, and 2022, at least the first half, there was a shortage of inventory, but you really rapidly, starting partway through second quarter of 2022, you can see that we went up and we went from only 10% of the inventory you'd expect to 50% of the inventory, exactly what you'd expect. The latter part of the year was right on the median, right where you'd expected. So it fell right down on the gray line. And then very early in 2023, when inventory is normally increasing, inventory just didn't increase this year. So we fairly rapidly went from the median inventory, the expected inventory, to the 10 percentile inventory. And basically starting in the month of July, we have lost, because inventory is normally increasing at this time of the year. As you can see, the 10 percentile lines going up, you can see the gray lines going up, but the purple line has been basically flat. We're just not seeing the growth in the inventory. Now looking at the number of offers, except the concept is the same, so I don't have to go into as much detail. You can see that the purple line is below the blue line. So that's saying that we're selling less homes, accepting less offers than you typically expect. And the reason I have not pending on the top of the title is almost everybody is looking at what they call pending data. And pending data is very misleading because that depends on how long a particular transaction is in escrow. If you have an escrow that is troubled and takes 10 weeks to sell, it counts as pending data for twice as long as the typical home if the typical home is 5 weeks. And if you have a home that goes through quickly in, say, 2.5 weeks, then it only counts for half a transaction because it's only in the data set for half as long. That's why I look at based on everything based on offers accepted, and I look at it for a 5-week period of time. So it doesn't matter the duration of time that the property pays in the escrow, which tends to stabilize and neutralize your statistics. It gets rid of data fluctuations caused on what's happening in the marketplace. But anyway, we have less offers accepted than we should be having. Now we flip over and we look at days of unsold inventory. So days of unsold inventory is typically at 42. In a hot marketplace, it's 26. So you're basically halfway in between that. Again, it's normally rising fairly quickly at this time. It's rising slowly, not nearly as much as you'd expect. And that's giving you a faster marketplace now than you'd expect by looking at where you'd expect the data to be. Here is looking at it instead of making you visually compare where you compare to the median. It'd be right on the black line if it was a median. So we're basically 81% of the median. You're 20% faster DUI than normal. So that's a hotter marketplace, which is why I put the red band at the bottom here and the blue band at the top. You can see the huge impact of the COVID announcement really causing the market to slow down, but you can see how quickly the market improved. Then it generally improved a little bit. You can see the slowdown in 2022, and then you can see the improvement in 2023. Here's the more simplified stuff for people that just want the basic data without all this manipulation. And this, again, is simply how long is this typical long seller taking to sell the property. So the typical long seller is defined by me to be the 75th percentile seller. So right now, with the long typical seller taking 18 days to sell, that's right where you'd expect it to be at 18, being the red. So that's the fastest. We're basically having the fastest paced marketplace. Where you'd expect it to be doing is taking almost an extra week at 6 extra days at 24 days. The slowest marketplace you'd expect at this time of the year is 27. Now, of course, since I'm defining the slowest as 90 percentile and the hottest is 10 percentile, you can go above that because you can have a 99 percentile year, you can have a 100 percentile year, you can have the worst year. So you can go above it, you just don't expect it to be above and below. Right now, sellers are taking about 75% of the time they typically take for selling. And again, sellers are taking about 75% of the typical time. And, that's a faster marketplace. So sellers are selling more rapidly than they normally do. This is looking at the average price reductions at the time offers are accepted. We're basically having exactly the expected number of price reductions at 99.2%. So on average, sellers are taking 0.8% price reduction. In a hot marketplace, they're taking 0.4% price reduction. In a slow marketplace, they're taking 1.7% price reductions. So you can see it as a fairly tight criteria, but it also allows you to see much earlier. In fact, if you come back here, when the market turned in 2022, this was the first indicator really to turn, and it turned about Valentine's Day. You can see that it was going up, it rolled over, it started coming back down. That is why I'm looking at this particular data point. It's my belief it gives you an early indication of what the market's doing. Here is the largest 10% reductions. So now instead of looking at the average, we're saying, okay, let's look at let's look at the sellers, the 10% of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction, and how big are those price reductions. You can see that right now, the purple line, we're taking a 12% price reduction, which sounds pretty severe, but those are the sellers that are taking the biggest price reductions. In the slowest marketplace, you'd expect it to be about 13.5%. In the hottest marketplace, you'd expect it to be about 9%. You can see we're taking bigger price reductions than typical, but we're fairly in line. And you can see in general, sellers are taking about a 12% price reduction. And again, this is only the 10% of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction. What amount is their average price reduction? So I'm ignoring 90% of the sellers, just looking at the 10% and seeing that those 10% are taking a 12% price reduction. And right now you can see that That's 6%, 6.5% bigger price reduction than typical. Again, if it was typical, it'd be right on the black line. Down here would be a hotter marketplace, and up here would be a cooler marketplace. With price reductions, you can see we went from a cool marketplace to a hot marketplace, then we slowed down a little bit, and right now we're improving slightly. This is the frequency of overbidding. You can see that at 12.7%. The frequency of the seller. So only 12% of the sellers are doing price reductions. So when you're looking at 10%, you're looking at almost every seller that's doing a price reduction. In the hottest marketplace, 11% of the sellers are doing price reductions. And in the coolest marketplace, the numbers up here, and these numbers don't look like they got updated, but I guess maybe that's about 26, 27, 6.5%. And the median would be closer to 16.5%. Here's the frequency at 75% of what you'd expect. Fewer sellers are taking price reductions than you'd expect. The frequency of sellers taking the price reductions 75%, so it's 25% lower than you'd expect. It's if you'd expect it to be 12%, it's 9%, because 3% drop off 12 is 25% lower, and that's what this 25% reduction is. Here's your average overbid. So right now we're flipping over and looking at what the buyers are doing. And right now the average buyer is paying 6.5% over ask price in Santa Clara County. You'd expect it to be 5.7%. In a hot marketplace, you'd expect it to be 7.6%. So again, buyers are willing to overbid. And this is the magnitude, so it's how much on average they're overbidding. This is the frequency, so you can see that basically a little over 2/3 of the sellers are getting more, or 2/3 of the buyers are offering more to the seller than the seller's asking. In a hot marketplace, you're up at 75%, and a cool marketplace, you're down at 56%. Here is your price on log paper. When you're above the straight inclined blue line, that's sort of the anticipated rate of appreciation. You were above where you'd expect. You can see in 2022, we were way above. In 2023, we were below. We caught back up to the line, and now we're dipping down a little bit below the line again. Here's the active inventory. So now we're sort of repeating ourselves, but instead of looking at Silicon Valley, we're looking at it on a county basis. So we started off looking at it on a micro market area. Then we looked at it globally, and now we're coming back and doing what a lot of people do, which is look at county-wide data. And you can see San Mateo County has about 408 listings. Santa Clara County has about 626, and Alameda County has essentially 700 listings. This is the offers accepted. You can see the numbers here for yourself. Now we've looked at days of unsold inventory. San Mateo County, which is typically, when you come back here pre-pandemic, was typically the fastest area, is now the slowest area by far. Alameda County is second at 33 days, and Santa Clara County is the fastest. And Alameda County historically was probably the slowest. You could sort of see the gray line was sort of at the top of the pack more often than not, but then coming out of the pandemic, part of there was right there at the bottom. It's now in second place. But the big takeaway, there's basically a reversal of roles. Alameda County was less desirable because of the longer commutes. San Mateo County was more desirable because of the short commutes. The need for short commutes by some people that are buying right now is no longer perceived as valuable, and therefore Alameda County is doing better and San Mateo County is doing worse. Here's time on the marketplace for the 75th percentile seller. You can see Santa Clara County and Alameda County are doing the same at 18 days based on that benchmark. And San Mateo County is significantly slower at 31 days. Not quite double, but it's significantly slower. To take 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks versus a month, that's a fairly big difference in my opinion. Here's the magnitude of price reductions. So how big is the biggest price reductions? And this is the average. So you can see in San Mateo County, they're taking the biggest price reductions at 1.6%. So this is all the sellers in San Mateo County. You can see Alameda County and Santa Clara County are basically only taking 0.6% reduction. So about 1/3 of the price reduction that San Mateo County is taking. This is the ask price frequency reduction. So how common or how frequently are sellers reducing their price? You can see it's basically 19% in San Mateo County, and it's basically right at 11 and 11.5% or 11.2%, it looks like, for Alameda County and Santa Clara County. Quite a bit lower in the two counties that are doing better, and quite a bit higher in San Mateo County at 19% of the sellers taking price reductions. This is now looking at what the buyers are doing. Alameda County is doing the best by far. You know, this is almost a surprising data where in Alameda County, where buyers are going for affordability, they're still willing to overbid, and they're overbidding the most at 9% above the seller's asking price on average. And then in Santa Clara County, it's basically 5.5%. And San Mateo County, even though we've been beating it up a lot, it's 3.5%. But again, you can see that San Mateo County has traditionally been towards the top of the pack, and now it's at the bottom of the pack, and the transition really did happen with the pandemic. This is the frequency of overbidding, same concept as last. Historically, San Mateo County is at or near the top of the pack. Post-pandemic, it's been basically at the bottom, and right now, only 53% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. In Santa Clara County, it's 68%, and in Alameda County, it's 76% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. This is the appreciation since 2015, the last 9 months in the three counties. You can see that traditionally they've been doing very similarly, and that's sort of the concept that tides rise all ships. And here you can see basically since the pandemic, San Mateo County has been doing significantly worse, and right now is only 65% appreciation. Alameda County is sort of surprising. You'd almost expect it to be the highest. It's at 71% appreciation. Santa Clara County is coming in with the highest appreciation at essentially 82% appreciation. Here's the median price. This is on log paper scale. I don't have my horizontal lines exactly correct, but you can see in Alameda County, it's got the lowest price at 1.26 million. So just over $1.25 million. And you can see it's basically at the price point it was in 2021. In Santa Clara County, you're at 1.8 million. And you can see that we're above the price point we were in 2021. And in San Mateo County, if that was dropped down onto the number of 1875, you'd be slightly below. So you can see Alameda County is equal to 2021 pricing. Santa Clara County is above 2021 pricing, and San Mateo County is just a smidge below 2021 pricing. And the reason you do something like this is when you have long flat periods of pricing like this, it's easier to do a CMA than in periods of time when you have huge price swings. Here is the same information on regular paper for those that prefer. Here I've adjusted the lines a little bit better, so you can see San Mateo County, the horizontal line is below the 2021 pricing. You can see Santa Clara County is above, and you can see Alameda County is essentially right at. Here's the payments for the three counties. Alameda County, the cheapest at $10,000. Santa Clara County coming in next at $14,300, and San Mateo with the highest at $14,900. Here is the data for the three counties that we've just been talking about, so you can look at the actual raw numbers. It's just too much data to throw it up there on the micro markets. And in fact, I sort of do throw it up on the micro markets in the table right after the heat maps, the summary table. Now we're leaving Silicon Valley behind, and we're looking at the Greater Bay Area. So now we're looking at 5 regions. We're looking at Silicon Valley being the first region that we just talked about in detail. The cities being San Francisco and Marin, the North Bay, Sonoma, Napa, Solano, Contra Costa, the Central Valley being San Joaquin and Sacramento, and the Central Coast being Santa Cruz and Monterey. Starting in the reverse order, here's the data for those that like it. Now we're looking at the active inventory. And, we've talked about the shortage of inventory in Silicon Valley. Look at what happened to the inventory in Central Valley. It's down here at 1,790, maybe that number is, maybe 1,800. But historically, it's up here somewhere around 4,500. So they've had a much greater reduction. And even the North Bay has had a fairly significant reduction, currently at 2,100. maybe you call it 4,400 and say that you have half the inventory you'd expect it to be. Harder hit or greater reduction of inventory than Silicon Valley. Here's the number of offers in the past 5 weeks. You can see that this is mostly based on geographical size. All the areas are down from where they typically are. We're just selling fewer homes for whatever reasons. Here's the days of unsold inventory. You can see that Silicon Valley is normally at the bottom of the pack by quite a bit, but right now the yellow line, which is the Central Valley, is giving it a pretty close run for its money. And even the gray line, the North Bay, is giving a fairly good run for the money compared to where they normally are. Normally, there's a bigger separation between the North Bay, the gray line. You can see it back through here, and the purple. They're much closer together at 43 to 33 and 37 to 33. So here you can see the 75th percentile, the time on the marketplace for the area. You can see Silicon Valley is the fastest, followed by the Central Valley. The other three areas are fairly close together. San Mateo County is the slowest at 39 days. The other two are 35 and 36. Now you're looking at the ask price reductions. You can see that the Central Coast and the San Mateo County area are doing the biggest price reductions, right at 98%. So a 2% price reduction. The North Bay is next at 1.2% price reduction. Central Valley is at 0.9% reduction, not very much. And Silicon Valley is at 0.8%. So you can see Silicon Valley is getting a pretty strong run from its money from the Central Valley area. Frequency of price reductions, the least frequent price reductions at 12% is Silicon Valley. You can see you got three areas right around 22% of the sellers are taking price reductions. And the area that's taking the most price reductions is the Central Coast at 27.5% of the sellers taking a price reduction. So essentially a quarter of the sellers. Here is the Greater Bay Area overbidding. So this is flipping over and looking at what the buyers are doing. The area that's doing the most overbidding is Silicon Valley at 6.5% above the ask price, followed by San Francisco and Marin, which is a little surprising at 4.6%. But I think what it boils down to is it's an expensive area, and people that are buying in expensive areas tend to have stock money that they treat as a little bit funny money, and they're willing to go up over more. But if you come back down to areas like the North Bay, the Central Valley, and the Central Coast, where funds are a little tighter, you can see that people are much more restrained in their magnitude of overbidding. It may be just as common to overbid, but the magnitude that they overbid is less. This is the frequency of overbidding that we were just talking about. So it is fairly low in the Central Coast at 44% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. But you can see that the three areas are right around 55% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. And the area that's doing the most is Silicon Valley at almost 2/3, 68%, or just over 2/3 at 68% of the sellers getting more than their asking price. Here's the total appreciation. And you can see that just like San Mateo County and Silicon Valley has done the worst, in region-wise, San Francisco and Marin has done by far the worst, only 27% appreciation since the last 9 months of 2015. Second place is a 68% appreciation. So 40%, almost triple the appreciation between last place and second to last place. And then you can see the areas are coming in pretty tight together with Silicon Valley. It looks at next at 80%. And then I can't tell which is which. I would actually say that the Central Coast, Monterey and Santa Cruz, even though it's slow, has got an 82% appreciation. And then the area that's doing the most is the Central Valley at 86%. And again, that's because of the commute. People are willing now to commute into Sacramento. They're willing to commute into San Joaquin, causing those prices to go up the most. Here's the median sold price. And noteworthy is Silicon Valley is now starting to be significantly higher than the cities. The cities, being San Francisco and Marin, is under 1.5, $1,495, so $5,000 under $1.5 million. And Silicon Valley is 1,560, so 60,000 above. So the difference between the two counties now is $65,000, with Silicon Valley being the most expensive. And you can see that has not happened in the 2014 since I'm graphing the data, and I'm not aware of it happening anytime previously in the past. So this reversal is pretty significant. Central Coast is sort of in the middle of the pack. Then the North Bay is definitely a more affordable region, and the most affordable region is the Central Valley. Here is the payments, same order as the others, so I won't go into it, but you basically can look at where your payment is. And again, I want to stress these are very rough estimates. You can see they fluctuate around a lot. A lot of it depends just on what the interest rate is on the day that I read it. You know, it fluctuates up and down quite a bit, which is sort of surprising in a buyer's in a shop and lock when it's at the valley, not when it's at the peak. And some of my calculations have been at the peaks. And with that, we're going to go over what I call my root URL. That's the green. That gets you to the YouTube archive. If you add in 2023 Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, you get to the live presentation. If you want the handout, which is posted, my goal is 15 minutes before 9 o'clock. I got it up about 8:30 this morning. You add in the green URL followed by the letter H for handout 2023-0812, and you change that date code for every week. If you want a specific episode, you just add in the date code without the H. And with that, I'm open for any questions. Not seeing anyone unmuting themselves, I will end the meeting. Thanks for attending. Have a nice week. Bye for now.